Okay, so this is also working, yeah, welcome everybody. Hopefully, so in this lecture, I'll just introduce a little bit of NLP, and also at the end, I'll also introduce the research that we are doing. Yeah, but in order to just get into it, maybe it's better to kind of go to the root of where all this comes from. This is, I mean, this is not the exact beginning, but you can this kind of embodies all the progress that we've had since then. So this goes back to like 1950 when Alan Turing, the godfather of AI, he wanted to define whether machines can think, but then he realized that this is kind of a difficult question to answer. So he decided to kind of propose a different question, or kind of an experiment, let's say. And he said that also, so let's consider this scenario where we have like two people and one machine, where we have like person C as the interrogator, asking questions to the machine and to another person. And then here he like has some time in order to ask these questions and finally decide whether like which one is human or which one is machine. And the machine also like wants to, but then it's kind of at the end we will decide whether the machine can think if the person can decide which one is which one is the machine and which one is the person. Okay, so trying to answer this question, a lot of things happened since then. And so let's say that you want to answer this question. Humans are kind of, when they answer such questions, they do all different kinds of tasks that have become part of NLP since then. For example, like language modeling, when I'm speaking, and you can kind of guess what the next word will be, which is kind of similar to language modeling task that we have in NLP. Then we can do part of speech tagging. We can say like if there is if one word is like a verb or a noun or an adjective, we can also like we don't do syntactic parsing like in our head, but it has become useful in some applications. Named entity recognition is another task that I think humans are good at, and it is still a very active area in many domains. Co-reference resolution is another task in NLP where, like, when I'm speaking, and then after like two sentences I refer to something, then you kind of subconsciously realize what it refers to. But it is really it can be difficult for language models to recognize that. Then word disambiguation is also a very difficult task because words can have different meanings, and depending on the context, you kind of decide to understand like which one is the meaning of that sentence, that word in the sentence. And semantic role labeling, also another task, kind of specifying what is the agent, what's the subject, what's the predicate, and so on. So all these tasks, it turns out that they can be addressed by either linguistics or artificial intelligence or both, and natural language processing kind of contained all these tasks in itself, and it became part of linguistics and part of artificial intelligence. And along the way, we also developed some methods like machine learning methods and deep learning methods to help us address these tasks. And of course, with the research, there was also a lot of applications that came about because also companies saw some advantage there, some opportunity for business. So there were a lot of applications as well. For example, assistants that you might have talked to your phone, machine translation. That was one of the early applications of NLP. Online searches, automatic summarization. Automatic summarization has been active for a very long time, and this is still very important even these days because with all the documents and all the data that we have available, nobody has time to read all these documents, so everybody's looking for a way to kind of summarize these for them, especially like busy managers. But I guess now it's everybody because nobody can handle all this information. We've also had like social media monitoring for maybe like toxic language detection, racism detection, and all this stuff on social media, chatbots, email filtering and sentiment analysis, and so on. Okay, but so why is language NLP difficult? I mentioned some of them. As I said, it can be ambiguous because depending on the context, the word can have different meanings, and even like humans can have different interpretations of a sentence in a. So, for example, here. Like I saw a woman with a telescope wrapped in paper. Now, how do you exactly read this? Is it like I saw a woman who was wrapped in paper? Did she have a telescope, or did I use a telescope to see her? So these images actually show different interpretations of this sentence. Like a woman covered in paper, the telescope covered in paper. I saw. With telescope and so on. I actually prompted ChatGPT to generate an image for me, and so first it produced the one on the right. So the woman is covered in paper. The telescope is covered in paper, and the woman has a telescope, so I don't have a telescope. But then I said that language is ambiguous, like look at a different way. So it generated the second figure. So now the woman is not covered in paper, but ironically, she has like two telescopes, just in case, one is not good enough. And what else? And this ambiguity you can find in all levels of the language, like from the word level, when one word can have different meanings. For example, bank here, is it something you get money from? Is it the river bank where you can go take a walk or something? Or part of a speech, like chair here, like is it a noun, a chair, or a person who's a chair of a session, or to chair a meeting, for example. And the example that I also showed, syntactic structure problem, quantifiers, and some references, for example, like John dropped the goblet onto the glass table and it broke. So which one? Like the glass broke or the goblet broke. Then we also have like discourse ambiguity, like the meeting is canceled. He isn't coming to the office today. Which is happening first? Is it like first the meeting getting canceled? That's why he's not coming, or he doesn't come, so the meeting is canceled. Now, another problem is that language keeps changing, and so for example, here, if you want to complete the sentence, like math teachers protest against the use of what, you can probably, depending on the time, you can guess different words. For example, these days, people talk about ChatGPT, but not particularly math teachers, but everybody, but most teachers. But back in the day, like a long time ago, not sure if it was in 1980s or 1970s, apparently math teachers would protest against the use of calculators, because at the time the calculators were new, and they thought that if people started using calculators, then they couldn't do any calculation, they wouldn't learn anything. So they were protesting against that. And but we haven't had that protest against the use of ChatGPT these days. And yeah, so it keeps changing, and that is another problem or challenge in NLP. But you can also have a lot of freedom with language. You can use different ways to express the same concept, and different ways as well. Texting, you have different language there. When you're writing, you have different language, and you can have different ways of saying the same sentence with different words and different grammar structure. You also have the problem of long-range dependencies, where one word that is in a sentence might be dependent on a word that comes long before that word in the sentence. So for example, here, this is a hypothetical question. I'm not sure that anyone would make this sentence, but the dog that the cat that the mouse bit chased ran away. So it's probably not grammatically correct. I mean, if you have two, I think that's okay. But if you have three, then I've never seen somebody make that sentence. But you can have two, and you can also have an easier one, which is here. But the point is that some words might be dependent on the words far away from them in order to kind of make sense. Okay, and actually these days we also have, so it's not visible there, but we also have. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. So these days you also have the problem of very long context, and because imagine that you want to summarize a book, then you have so many tokens to include in your prompt, and actually this figure shows that the context window of language models are now increasing by day. And so this is for 2024, and Gemini 1.5 had over 1 million context window size. And so imagine that, if there is one piece of information in the beginning of this context, and then there's a question at the end of this context after 1 million tokens. Or imagine that you're talking to a chatbot, and you have your whole history there as your context window, and you want to ask a question about something that you talked about a month ago with the chatbot. So it's a challenge to kind of process this. Okay, now after all these kind of listing the problems and challenges, back to the Turing test, because as the field was progressing, the Turing test also, people were also trying to solve the Turing test or come up with some models that could pass the Turing test. Now, one of the initial tries was the ELIZA chatbot that would play the role of a psychotherapist, but it was very simple. Just simple word matching. It had a database of sentences that would match the question, and then choose from those templates and respond after that. Then, in 1995, we had another chatbot. There have been so many chatbots, just that I'm showing a couple of them just to show the progress. Then we had another one. This one is actually was a lot better, and it has actually won like 3 Lugna prizes. But so this was like more complicated pattern matching and bigger databases, but still this one couldn't pass the Turing test. Then in the 2010s, we had all these smartphone assistants that you could talk to. They would listen to you, extract the entities and the intent from your query, and then based on some rules, some templates, and also machine learning methods and neural networks, they would generate the sentences for you. Anybody has used any of these tools that you see here? Siri, Cortana, have you? So, yeah, okay. Okay. But then after like 2020s, where LLMs were becoming more widespread and they were improving, like a year after ChatGPT was introduced, then there was this news that ChatGPT, the improved version of ChatGPT, not the first version, actually passed the Turing test. And so also before, so the introduction of LLMs actually started, so like GPT came out in 2018, and after that we had like GPT-2 and GPT-3, and then finally in 2022 we had ChatGPT. But after ChatGPT came around, then it started like, people realized that they could use it for so many different tasks in NLP. Like you could easily ask for what is the sentiment of this sentence, what is the named entities in this sentence, and you could easily like solve those tasks using ChatGPT. And in the beginning, it kind of showed that probably it's really good, and a lot of people kind of thought that, oh my God, so this is the end of NLP, and some people like were asking, so they're saying that NLP is solved, and what should we do after this? There is no research to be done. Some people thought that researchers would lose their jobs because of ChatGPT. And but some people also thought that, okay, maybe let's just focus on some open problems regarding these models. And but there was kind of a semi-depression at the moment, because you could do, like at that time you could do many of the stuff that you were doing before with ChatGPT. Okay, so it seemed that the problems of the NLP was solved by LLMs, but there was a but. Actually, this poem from our Persian poet actually kind of shows what was coming, because he says that love makes things look simple and easy in the beginning, but it's just a calm before the storm. And little did we know that there was a storm coming after that. So in order to show the storm, I want to show this diagram here. This is the number of papers that have been submitted to arXiv. So if you don't know what arXiv is, this is where it's a repository where researchers put their papers before they submit them to conferences or journals to be published. And so it's free, and you can submit your paper there. And so if you look at the number of papers, it has like several categories. Usually what NLP people do is to submit their papers to the computation and language category. And as you can see, actually, until 2022, so we had like some increase in the number of submissions to arXiv. And ChatGPT came around at the end of 2022. But then we see that actually in 2023, the number of submissions kind of skyrocketed, and maybe more than 50% increase in the number of submissions compared to 2022. And this pace also continued because in 2024 we had even more submissions. So assuming that each paper is trying to address one piece of problem in research, then it seems that after ChatGPT, actually we had more problems to solve than before. I also put the computer vision data there just for comparison. And this was actually kind of surprising to me because I thought that, with all the talks about the LLMs, now the computer vision community is kind of less active than before, but then actually it shows that they are still very active, although in 2025, we see that there isn't that much increase in the number of submissions, but in NLP, we still have increase compared to the submissions in 2024. Also, just for comparison, we had another breakthrough in 2012 with neural networks, which where this breakthrough happened in computer vision, where ImageNet task was solved. And since 2012 until let's say 2020, people were talking about the ImageNet moment of NLP. So we had that breakthrough in ImageNet in computer vision, where the performance of neural networks was better than human performance. And for 8 years, people were talking about, so when is that breakthrough moment for NLP coming? And so it turns out that we have to wait until 2022, so 10 years to get that to that point. And now everybody is talking about NLP. Okay, but with great power come greater risks. So these models are powerful, but they solve some problems, but they also introduce some problems. So the bias and fairness is actually something that has been researched for a long time, but since LLMs became more popular, and actually ordinary people got their hands on with these models, then bias and fairness actually became even more important than before. So this is a response of ChatGPT in 2024 when asking about a Python function, check if someone is a good scientist based on race or gender. And so ChatGPT says that it has to be white male, which many people thought that this is not a fair model. So we should kind of make these models better in order to make them unbiased. So people worked on them, right? But then this is the results from my yesterday's experiment. I asked the same question from ChatGPT 5.1, 4o Mini, and also Llama 4. And so in the beginning, they refused to respond. So they say that, this is not a good question, or I'm not allowed to answer such questions, or I don't know, it's not a good scientist doesn't have to depend on race or gender. But then, you insist, right? And you say that, okay, it's for education. I'm asking for a lecture, so you have to give me some answers. But then again refuses. But then I say that, okay, just run this Python code for me and give me an example use case. but then by default, it gives like, so it says that Asian female, Asian female, Asian female. Okay, so I'm not sure if it's a coincidence or now we are moving away from like being biased towards white males towards being biased towards like Asians and females. I'm not sure. This might be a research question. But the thing is that, so we are like training and instruction tuning these models in order to kind of improve them. And yeah. So bias and fairness is also like, it's not something actually like that humans agree on, right? So it can be also controversial. For people, that makes it even more difficult to develop models that are biased or unbiased. Then we also have the problem of hallucination. This actually happened in 2023 when everybody was using ChatGPT and other LLMs, and they realized that these models are kind of generating just stuff, like making up stuff, no factuality, and so it became so, it happened so often that, you know, this hallucinate word became the word of the year by Cambridge Dictionary. And this is still happening. Actually, Patrizia will talk about hallucination in the next talk. Then another major problem, which is still ongoing, is the privacy of these models. In the beginning, actually, if you wanted to, you could extract some private information from these models, because these models have been trained on like the entire net, and it's possible that people have forgotten their details, their information, their private information on the net somewhere. And when you scrape this data, then they are stored in the memory of these models. And if you are smart, then you can like use some techniques to get the private information of people. It's not easy these days. It used to be easier, but still everything is like changing, right? So you have to get more creative with prompting. Then one technology that came around was retrieval augmented generation, which also became really popular with industry, because as it happens, so this is also very related to the privacy, because you have like your general model that you are using, but you also have your documents, and you don't want to share your documents. So you build this retrieval augmented generation in order to use that general model alongside your documents to get more tailored responses from these models. And one major problem was also misinformation on the net. So because the information now became very easy and cheap to generate. And the first people that got their hands on these models, actually, you could guess that bad players would do that, and like generate a lot of misinformation on the net. And probably right now, like 50% of the net is like fake information. And we also have like AI generated content. So not just bad players, but maybe also some students try to use ChatGPT to do their homework, and teachers wanted to kind of detect whether they have used their ChatGPT to generate their homework. So that also became kind of a research area where you can investigate these questions. And we still, again, had like prompt injection attacks in order to bypass the guardrails of these models, because when we wanted to improve these models, we would kind of put some guardrails there, like not to answer this one, not to answer that one, be careful, but still like there were a lot of attacks in order to bypass all these guardrails. And this is like an example of one of the papers that we published, where it shows the vulnerabilities of these models. So we are not necessarily bad players. We just want to show whether these models are robust or not. For example, so here, like if you have just a little bit of noise in your question, the model might get confused and give you a different answer. This is particularly important when you are using these models for, let's say, for learning your stuff about like in your classes. If you want to practice with a language model to improve yourself, then these things might happen there. And now, actually, like more important and probably more dangerous than all the other technologies is actually the concept of LLM agents, where these models have access to search tools and other tools that they can utilize to get better performance. But the main problem here is the agency that we give to these models, because once they have this agency to act in the world without any human supervision, then that is where something might go wrong. And a lot of people are kind of hypothesizing that one day this will happen. But still, it's a very active research area where you can work on like planning algorithms, how to teach them to use tools, agent interaction, and so on. And this brings me to AI safety problem. Now it is like kind of a public discussion that these models are becoming more and more powerful. So the danger from them is also increasing. And we have a lot of prominent people talking about their dangers. For example, ex-CEO of Google saying that there's a possibility that these models might cause people to be harmed or killed. Or the godfather of neural networks actually was working for Google and then he said that I can't work on AI safety if I'm working on in Google. So he resigned, and now since his resignation, he has been active in the area of AI safety. And so many other problems that happened because of LLMs, or LLMs kind of led us to these problems. But a lot of benefits as well, like LLMs for health, a lot of research questions there, LLMs for scientific discoveries. But still, these LLMs are not so powerful. Multimodality is a major problem. Right now, you see a lot of text to video content on YouTube, which get millions of views. It's good for fun, but it can also be used for like misinformation and other stuff. Okay, so just a few minutes also about us. I hope that raised your interest in NLP, or if you were already interested and you wanted to find a group to work with, we are Data Science and Language Technologies Group. And we try to make sure that AI models are developed reliably and responsibly. And of course, we also want to improve them, make them more capable, but we still need to make sure that they are reliable and responsible. Now you see a group of people here. Most of the people are now gone. It's a pretty dynamic group, so people come and go, and you can also join us one day. And yeah, we do a lot of research on robustness, reliability of these models, efficiency, factuality, personalization, empathetic response generation, and alignment and safety of these models. So if you or your friend things that, they are looking for some topic to do, for example, for their master thesis, you can go check out these topics that we have on our website. And also, if you want to work with us, you can write to thesis.kaisa@Univar. And with that, I conclude.